So today with us we have Amber from Michigan State University, Matthew from Imperial College London, Salil from St. George's University, and Ashwin from York University. So the first section that we're going to look at is kind of looking at medical school in these 4 different countries: Canada, Grenada, the UK, and the United States. So without further ado.
So medicine in Canada is probably one of the most sought after profession, and also there's a scarcity of doctors in Canada. Having said that, there are only 17 universities that actually offer medicine in Canada. And it's not a direct entry program, and students have to have another degree first before they enter or appear for the MCAT also. The duration of the course is usually around 3 to 5 years, and the tuition fees ranges between $30,000 to $79,000 a year. Memorial being the lowest at $30,000, and University of Toronto at $79,000 a year. The statistics don't show a great picture either. It says that there are 41 permanent residents studying medicine in Canada as of 2017 and 18, and there are only 9 international students, that is visa students, studying medicine in the year 2017 and 19. I'll cover more on the stats in the later slides.
I'd rather stand up. Thank you. First of all, thank you, Amber, for getting us together. It's a great forum. Now, I work for St. George's University, which is primarily based in Caribbean, and it's Caribbean medicine school. The reason I want to really highlight about the overview of Caribbean, we have over 45 institutions across the Caribbean, primarily doing one thing: offering medicine education. As per the US curriculum, the cost really varies between $80,000 for the whole program to around $335,000, and that's me, St. George's University. Most Caribbean med schools train and teach for US residency. So if you go and just Google about US Caribbean medicine schools, they will be training and teaching as per for the US residency positions. High acceptance rates, primarily in the Caribbean medicine schools, depending on, because of the entry requirements, there are universities which can accept 50% scorers in 10 plus 2s or low GPAs, but it can vary up to 90% like us. But what is important info you should be looking across when you are searching for a medicine school in the Caribbean, that they should be CAMHP accredited. That's a very important accreditation, and it has to be accredited. If not, then the students graduating from that institute will not be considered as an international medicine graduates. That's very, very important. Unfortunately, there are very few who are accredited by CAMHP in the Caribbean. Only accredited by, only 2 or only 3 are accredited by US Department of Education. So that is very important, that if you are training them, teaching them to be in US, for US residency positions, they have to be accredited by them. Only 3 institutes accredited by Council of Education of Public Health. Now the reason I'm talking about these accreditations, that really highlights when you are not in US or UK or Canada, you are in Caribbean, what type of education qualification you should be aiming at, or the student should be looking towards. Obviously, say with regards to the veterinary program as well, we are in a notion where we have a public health, medicine, and veterinary program, and St. George's offers one health, one word, one medicine curriculum, where the students get into one campus, do research and study on the whole environmental side of the medicine education itself. This is very important when you are guiding and counseling a student. What the students should be looking into when they choose a Caribbean med school? Is the medicine program accredited locally and globally? Is it recognized in India, if they're coming from Indian background, and globally as well or not? Because St. George's, like us, are recognized in US, UK, Canada, Australia, and in India as well. What is the actual attrition rate? If you just Google again, you will find the attrition rate among Caribbean med schools can vary between anything between 30 to 50%. But you have to really boil down to individual universities. Like St. George's is only 6%. Do they assure clinical rotations in US or UK? Primarily, Caribbean med schools have the tendency of offering clinical rotations or hospital training in US or UK or not. I would really look into the clinical network. Are there accredited hospitals or not, which are primarily ACGME recognized hospitals? That will help you to get a rotations or residencies in US or UK. Without that, it's extremely difficult to get a job. Hidden cost, are you paying extra for clinicals? Because sometimes many universities in this region will not really tell you that you have to pay extra for clinicals. USMLE pass rate, just to highlight on the USMLE side of it, USMLE stands for United States Medicine Licensing Examination. It's a unified exam. Everybody has to take it if they want to be a doctor in US. Everybody will talk about good pass rates about the Caribbean med schools, but you have to look deeper into it. Are they actually all the students, or they are cutting a barrier between the program itself? Like we say 96% pass rate, but we are talking about the day the students get enrolled, number of students getting enrolling and taking the test. We're talking about that. Residency success rate, but it is important to see the success, but what really happens to the unsuccessful candidates as well. That's an important aspect. Though we have 93% success, but 7% of our students do not get a residency. How does the university help them getting the numbers from 93 to 98% like us? How do we support them? Student to faculty ratio, infrastructure plays a vital role because not every medicine school at the same cadre, what you talk about when we talk about 45 universities, there can be only 1 room or 2 room universities as well in the Caribbean. Please check into that. Support services and obviously student diversity is a very important aspect. Students moving out from India, getting into a global curriculum, they should be looking at diversity of students across. Alumni stories and regional alumni network plays a vital role in the student success, in this, especially in the medicine curriculum. So that's from my side. I think I'll have a second slide. I do. Sorry. So CAM-HP, the three of the, I did discuss about these accreditations and approvals. CAM-HP is one of the most important one. World Federation of Medical Education. These two itself gives you a global recognition, which includes US, UK, Canada, and US Department of Education. So US citizens can get a federal loan to study with us, being in the Caribbean. So that's very important for us. What happens in the curriculum-wise and this program structure, most of the Caribbean med schools would offer a 4-year program, which is the MD program as per the US curriculum, or a 5-year program, which is a 1 year of preclinical plus 4 years, and a 6-year program and a 7 program. But the entry requirements varies. For a BSc degree, students can into 4-year program, with a 90% in 10+2s or IB 36 can get into a 5-year program. Anything less than that can be considered for a 6-year program. It's very important to check with individual universities what their entry qualifications are. Oh, that's me. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the medical system in the UK. Quick question, counsellors in the room, does your heart sink when a student asks you and says, I really want to do medicine? Yeah. My heart sinks a little bit as well, and it took me a couple of years to kind of try and get over that, and I hope that we're going to talk on the panel a little bit later about exciting, inspirational alternatives to medical school for these incredible students, and for those students who are really, really determined to do medicine, to be able to give them the best chance possible. Because like I say, it took me a good couple of years to stop my heart just going, this is a shame. So the UK medical system is maybe unusual in the fact that it is mostly an undergraduate system. So a 17-year-old, a 16-year-old comes up to you and says, I want to do medicine, and they can start applying for it, and we will start assessing them and trying to work out if, as a 21-year-old, 22-year-old graduated doctor on their first day on the job, they're going to be capable and empathetic. So we do undergraduate medicine. We have a lot of, but that's the most typical route. You would go straight from your high school qualification into undergraduate medicine at a university, and then straight into the foundation years that you can see on your screen up there, which is essentially what the UK calls internship, foundation years, just different terms. There is a postgraduate route for medicine in the UK. There are several universities, I think Swansea being the most known one, that only have a postgraduate medical course. They are more competitive than the undergraduate medical courses because a whole load of failed medical students will do biomedical sciences for 3 years in the UK and then apply for postgraduate medicine. Okay? So we'll talk about some of the realities of the numbers in a minute. The undergraduate medical students and the graduate medical students will join each other in when it comes to their foundation years. They will do those for 2 years. At this point, you are a trained doctor. You have a medical degree that you can take pretty much anywhere in the world, the US being the exception. Vice versa, you can't do medical school in the US and come straight to the UK. We kind of have to take each other's final year medical exams in order to practice. But Canada, Australia, pretty much any country in the world will accept a UK medical qualification at this point. It is very common for a doctor to decide to take something called Foundation Year 3, which is where they go to New Zealand or Australia and surf for a year and will work sometimes in an Australian hospital. Then they start on their speciality training and they start moving in different directions. A junior doctor is anyone who's not a consultant, and you are training until the point where you're a consultant. It might take 15 years to become a consultant. The quickest you can do it in the UK would be a 5-year medical programme, 2 years of foundation, and then 3 years of GP training, general practice training, because the UK doesn't have enough of those. So that's a brief overview of the system itself, and there's a few interventions in there where international students can kind of come in, which I'll talk about a little bit later as well. This is briefly what an undergraduate medical training sort of looks like in the UK. This is from Imperial, but it will be very, very similar across most universities. Patient contact from day one, a whole series of clinical rotations, but essentially the first few years, a lot of anatomy, a lot of lectures, a lot of bringing people up to speed on the biology that they need to do an allopathic medical degree. As they start moving through time, it becomes more and more and more about clinical rotations. And they'll spend much, much more time out in hospitals to the point where they're not spending any time in lectures at all. They're just on rotations and taking teaching. The term you might hear at some medical schools, which is why it's the differences between 5 and 6 years, there's some options there, is some medical schools have what's called an intercalated degree, where they will essentially take a full biomedical sciences degree, or BSc, full research for 1 year. So it's a highly intensive undergraduate degree qualification done in 1 year. So although the students are going to be undergraduate medics, they haven't done a degree first, they will come out generally with 2 or 3 different degree level qualifications. Bachelor's of Medicine, Bachelor's of Surgery, and a BSc from an intercalated degree. Okay. There's sometimes the argument that you should go to the US because you'll have more training and you'll be a better researcher because you've done a first undergraduate degree. I'm not sure how much I agree with that. I'm slightly biased, but we obviously insert this intercalation in the middle of it. It's quite important to Imperial to make sure students have research knowledge, because these degrees are going to change, because an AI is much, much more effective at looking at a rash than a consultant dermatologist. So that's going to disappear as a specialty. So we need to kind of be training doctors for tomorrow rather than just today. So that's basically the UK medical system in a nutshell.
On to the US. So in the US, I'm going to start by breaking down the 2 different actual paths to being a practicing doctor in the US. And the 2 big ones are actually the MD, Doctor of Medicine, or the Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. How many of you have never heard of osteopathic medicine? I'd never heard of it until like a year ago. I felt really bad about it. But they're actually both full medical programs. The paths look very similar. They're just slightly different concentrations as they're going through the courses. Although realistically, a lot of the courses that both programs take will be quite similar. So the MD is what we all know, and very similar to our friends in the UK. That's an allopathic medicine program. However, the osteopathic medicine is, as it sounds, osteopathic. So if you're talking to a DO about the difference between the 2 programs, the DO is going to say that they look at a more holistic view on medicine, and they're very focused on preventative care, along with some manipulative medicine. So it's similar to a chiropractor who might help push your back into place and help you feel better that way. A DO will learn some specific methods to use manipulative medicine with patients, whereas the MD will not. Realistically, if you talk to an MD, they're going to tell you that they too are interested in holistic medicine and in preventative care. And so I think there's a lot of overlap between the 2. Realistically, the breakdown in the United States, about 75% of our medical school graduates come from the MD side. The other 25 are coming from the DO track. So the numbers are very different. However, in actuality, both paths can take you to a residency and specialty program. There really is a best fit student for both paths, and I would highly recommend that students who are very serious about being doctors in the US check into what those differences are. Michigan State is unique, and this is why I know the difference now. We have both programs on campus. Most universities will have one or the other. Now, once you're through deciding which path you want, you've got a lot of school in front of you. So much school. So as many of you guys are aware, in order to go into a medical program in the United States, you do have to start with an undergraduate degree. That undergraduate degree could be a pre-medical program at some universities. For a lot of larger schools, we'll have a student do a general degree in something like chemistry, biology, could even be English literature. We don't care. pre-med advising to help them transition into medical school later. During this time, students are getting their research skills. They're also getting a general bachelor's degree that, in our mind, they could use for many professions should they not be successful in transitioning into medical school or just simply change their mind when they realize what long hours those are. And so after they've done their 4 years, they'll apply for admission into either a DO or MD program. A lot of students will apply into both, and that's absolutely fine. There are different applications for both, but they will both require the MCAT. Then medical school is another 4 fun years of very intense medical training. For those 4 years, the cost, it's going to vary greatly, but it's going to be an average of probably around $60,000 per year of medical school just for tuition and fees, not including housing. That's for 4 years, and then they transition into the match period. During the match, that's when students are figuring out where they're going to be doing their residency program. Residency is basically extended internships, and I guess the word that I'm looking for is apprenticeship, essentially, where you're working, you're practicing under licensed, fully certified doctors and getting hands-on experience. The period of time that a student does that will vary based on the track that they've chosen to take. Some students might be doing a residency as few as 3 years, but it could go up to 7 years for students who are doing more of a specialist program. During that time, they're technically professionals. They're getting paid, but the pay rate is much, much, much lower than it will be for a fully certified doctor. And so the Medscape did a poll of 1,900 residents, and the average for the 5 years, let's say, is about $60,000 per year of pay. The further in, it might be a little bit more. If you're in your 6th year, you might be getting $65,000. But if we look at how much a student has paid just for medical school, if we're just going with the average and assuming they had no living cost, they've got at least $240,000 of loans behind them if they were taking that out. And so that period of time when you're in residency, you're not at full earning capacity. And so that's a definite consideration. And then finally, we go into certification and licensure after that. That's when you're a fully practicing physician, licensed and certified to go wherever you want. And that, my friends, is the U.S.
So now we're going to be talking about what numbers look like and what kind of alternatives are available, because I don't know about you guys, but as a counselor, when I sit down with students and I'm like, so here's how hard it's going to be and how expensive they're going to be, they're like, then how do I become a doctor? And I'm like, well, let's look at some other options. Maybe let's look at these options also. But so we're going to move on to the second part of our session, which is kind of looking at the realities of specific schools and then opportunities that are available as well.
So we're back to Canada again. Of the 17 universities that have faculties of medicine, there are only 7 universities which actually take international visa students. So those are the first 7. And then there are 3 other universities which also take permanent residents. Now again, the numbers still remain the same. It's 41 PR students and 9 visa students. And these are the total number of students that have entered in the medicine program in all of Canada, the 17 institutions that I'm talking about. The highest being University of Montreal and the second highest being University of British Columbia. And the total is just 2,872, and this is in the year 2017 and 18. So the percentage of visa students is 0.3%, and the percentage of PR students in that cohort is 1.3%. In total, it's 1.6% of the students who are in these programs. However, the good news is that students can enter with various programs into the medicine program. It doesn't have to be that they're studying sciences or biomedical. As you can see from this chart over here, this is the entrance into the medicine program in McMaster in 2017 and 18. Out of the 206 students who entered the program, only 100 of them were from sciences. The rest of them are from different backgrounds, including arts and kinesiology and health sciences and psychology. So what we recommend students is that it is very important for them to choose a program which has an alternative at the end of the 4-year or 3-year undergraduate program they're studying. If they don't end up entering a medical school, they at least have a degree that they're passionate about and they can pursue a career in that. The other interesting thing that we are facing lately is the permanent residents applying for a pre-medicine program at York University. and thinking that they're going to get into the program, because when they see the entry requirements or the eligibility on a university's website, it says permanent residents can apply. But what they don't realize is permanent citizens are not considered as the citizens of Canada. So the stats in the previous slide represent the citizens, not the permanent residents. So in these 2,872, it's only 41 permanent residents again. But they are mistaking the permanent residents and citizens can apply to thinking that they are both considered as equal status, but that's not the case. So the permanent residents still are much lower priority than the citizens itself.
Now talking again about Caribbeans, I know we're talking about alternatives, and I kind of hate to say that we are the alternative for getting into the US or Canadian medicine school, though we want to become the one of better opportunities for the students. Now, in terms of success, we really define the success for all our students based on their outcome in getting into the US or UK medicine system, or even coming back to their home country. When we talk about US residency, we have recently placed this year itself almost 959 students in the US residency positions from St. George's University. Our graduates are practicing over 50 plus countries across the globe with 93% success ratio of a graduating rate this year who have got residency. Also talking about non-US citizens, 85% of our students have got into US residencies this year too. So the success is really determined on that rate. Now talking about other success pointers, so specifically the Caribbean, you will also see a lot of universities talking about USMLE first-time pass rate. You're talking about students getting into US, Canada, and UK. Academic research, because a lot of students do not really want to practice all the time. They have a small group of students who want to get into academic research. A lot of St. George's University students do get into WINREP, which is a research organization to medicine specifically. Though they can go back to their home country or US universities too. Few students, as I said, return to their home country. 20% doctors in Botswana and Trinidad and Tobago are from St. George's University grads. So they were trained and taught at St. George's and now back to be in home country. In UK itself, St. George's has placed over 145 doctors. Talking about Caribbean itself, there's a big push in the Caribbean medicine school. If you're choosing the top Caribbean medicine schools, you are primarily looking into the global skilled medicine exposure. Many of the Caribbean would offer a dual degree. Now this is a very new kind of a program because medicine is usually not considered with a dual degree options. They can do medicine plus a public health program, medicine with an MSc or even an MBA program, making the students employable once they graduate. Support from Department of Education Services, not everything is based on the curriculum delivery, but also the support given by the university itself plays a vital role in the student success, and clinical network and regional alumni support. So these are the important aspects from the student success side. But that's a process. I think Amber did cover part of it already in a slide, but from the day the students get into the medicine curriculum, they have a long path to go to become, by the time they become a board certified doctor. And after finishing an MD program, either at Caribbean or US med school, they have to do a residency program which can vary between 3 to 7 years. And they are different. I just put on a chart here which shows how many years it can take to become, let's say, a neurological surgeon. That can take roughly around 7 to 8 years. So 5 plus or 8 plus 7 or 8 years. It's a long journey, but a rewarding journey for all the students, and extremely competitive too. Licensing is a very, very important aspect of medicine education because eventually, though universities may have a global accreditation or individual accreditations, a lot of countries would ask for individual licensing. Whether USMLEs for US, FLAP for UK, or Canada would have been MCEE. So what it primarily means is, or India would have exit examination now from next year. The students who are graduating from overseas institutions who want to practice in those countries should qualify and clear these examinations. It's extremely important for them. But where we are turning in next decade or so, what we are looking into is getting into a single qualification for worldwide window. So you have one qualification in medicine that will be accepted across. It is primarily only done for Commonwealth countries, but as Matt mentioned about there is no partnership between US and UK medicine education. That is something currently the medicine faculty is working on, which is WHO at the moment. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk as quickly as I can about the realities of applying to a UK medical school. So I pulled off Imperial's medical school sort of stats for this year. And it's going to be a broadly similar picture across the whole of the UK. The government applies a 7.5% cap on the number of international students studying medicine that you're allowed to have in the UK. So that's sort of broadly true. If you
want government subsidy for your medical school, okay, so the vast majority are going to be in a similar sort of position. I pulled off Imperials, obviously. You know, UCL and Cambridge aren't going to share these numbers. I'm happy to sort of share them with you for Imperial. But so we had 593
applications for our international medical program, okay, which essentially is 24 places alongside the roughly 300 that we have. So you sort of look at the numbers there and you know, exactly what you were talking about. It becomes quite, you know, diminishingly unlikely, but not impossible, that a student's going to get in. Now, I met a student who had studied here in Mumbai, who had got in for undergraduate medicine, and she said, could you connect me with the other Indian students from Mumbai who will be coming to Imperial for medicine? And I said, I'm really sorry, but you're the only one in India. Okay, and she sort of jaw to the ground. So we rejected this year 356 students due to they either didn't meet our college academic minimums, or they didn't meet, they weren't high enough in the BMAT score that year to be high enough in the cohort to be invited to interview, or we didn't like the personal statement, we didn't like the reference, whatever that was. 356 were rejected at this point. So we then invited 167 students to interview and made offers to 61 of those, and placed 24 students. Well, we're expecting to place 24 students. So those are kind of the realities going through of applying to a UK medical school. I don't necessarily want to discourage fantastic students from applying to medicine, but sorry, I just got let's go on to the next slide. That's fine. Okay. So another question for counsellors in the room. What do you think is the first question that we ask in a medical school interview? What would you ask somebody? They're sitting down in front of you, they want to be a doctor. Someone shout out something.
Why do you want to be a doctor?
Why do you want to be a doctor? Fantastic. And then the student kind of answers and they say, I want to help people, I want to give back to my community, etc., etc., etc. The second question that we ask is, why don't you be a nurse? And the student suddenly looks at us and goes, wow, no one's ever asked me that question before, unless they're incredibly well prepared. And then they end up in this weird situation where they're having to have a go at nursing and, you know, diminish nursing in order to push up why they want to do medicine. And they tie themselves in these incredible knots. That's the first thing that I ask a student when they say, I really want to do medicine, is, well, okay, why don't you be, and then you insert something else. Yeah? And this isn't about preparing your students to answer that question in the interview. It's about making sure that the students are answering that for the kind of the right reasons. Yeah? Nursing in the UK is a master's level degree. They do very little of the Florence Nightingale stuff where they're cleaning up after people. Believe me, and there are far too few of them, and parity in pay with doctors is increasing massively. Right? The WHO, massive public health bodies, really want PhD level nurses to come in and sort out public health policy. Yeah? I'm not, and so I speak, so my wife's a doctor, and so I've learned a huge amount, shall we say, about all of the allied healthcare professions. They shouldn't be looked down on as being less than being a doctor. It is a team taking care of a person. The other thing that I often say to students is, you really want to help people. How many people do you want to help? And they'll say, oh, I don't know. If you're a GP in the UK, you have 10 minutes per patient appointments. So you can see 6 patients an hour. So you're talking maybe about seeing 45 to 50 patients per day throughout your working career of maybe 30 years. 20 years of you actually being a GP. When you start adding those up, how many people have they helped is going to be this number. The person who discovers what the next set of antibiotics is, because otherwise we're all doomed, is going to save however many millions of lives. So for me, when a student says to me, I really want to do medicine, it's not that they want to do medicine necessarily, it's that they don't really understand what that actually means, and they're looking for a pathway to do what it is that they want to do. They're millennials. They want to help people, right? Fantastic, amazing, great motivation to do that. There are alternative ways of doing that. So I talked about this on the slide here. So I talked about the allied healthcare courses related subjects. To give Imperial a plug, bioengineering, both biomedical engineering, i.e. wearable tech, wearable medical tech, and actually genetic engineering, the preventative side of the medicine, going right into editing people's genes so that they're not susceptible to certain diseases. That's a whole area that we're looking at. The other way, obviously, to get in and be a doctor in the UK is qualify pretty much anywhere in the world that is accredited by the General Medical Council, and they print a list of those. Do an exam, one more exam in their lives called UK PLAB, which is the Professional Linguistics Assessment Board. It's basically a medical test, and at that point you would be able to enter UK medical training at foundation level and start training if you want to be in specialist areas. You don't have to study in the UK or US or Canada or Australia in order to be a doctor in the UK. Believe me, the NHS is held up by tens of thousands, thank you very much, of Indian doctors and Portuguese nurses. Okay? So the realities, we're talking about it, are that there are other ways in. You do not have to go to UK, Australia, Canada, wherever, the US. It'd be a very, very kind of colonial way of looking at it, which simply isn't the case. Qualify somewhere and then come to the UK. Okay, that's enough of me.
Well, that's enough to follow up. All right, so let's look at some of the application realities for the US. And actually, I found these fascinating personally, because the numbers, they tell different stories depending on how you look at them. And I've broken it up by DO and MD because they both report their numbers very transparently, but they both report slightly different ways. And so we'll start with the DO program. They get about 21,000 applications every year. These are their 2018 numbers. Of that, only 328 will be non-US citizens. An important caveat, when talking to both DO and
MD programs, they made very clear that they're very comfortable with accepting Canadian citizens. And so that non-citizen applicant number includes Canadian students. Of that 328, about 200 of them are actually Canadian citizens. So the number of applicants crashes from there into a much smaller pool. And then 77 of that 328 were actually admitted and matriculated into these programs. Of the 77, if you're looking at just those who are on F1 visas, only 59 of those students are F1 visa holders. Remember, this is about 25% of US medical students that'll do the DO program. Moving to the MD program, you'll find some differences, of course, across the board, and some of the applicants will apply both DO and MD, but they've got closer to 37,000 applicants total. Of that, a stronger number, just under 2,000 of those are non-citizen applicants. Again, including those Canadians. They don't break it out separately, though. And then 275 will be matriculated students into MD programs. There are a lot of considerations to put into context here. One, I think in the US we know the number of places in medical programs for international students, not great. And so while you might see the numbers if you break it down into percentages and say, oh, well that's not awful. In reality, a lot of those students don't even try because they've been advised, perhaps quite appropriately, that the odds aren't great or in their favor. A lot of students, I think, also, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in the next slide, realize as they're going through that undergraduate application process, oh, maybe I don't need to be a doctor.
Maybe I could follow one of these other paths. And I think that as counselors, we see that in your students a lot, where they're thinking, I need to be a doctor, and then maybe later they'll realize that there are these other options. And so I think that's
part of why we see numbers so low applying into these programs, a combination of realizing about these other things and being advised consistently from you, from me, from academic advisors in undergraduate programs that perhaps the odds aren't in their favor. And many medical programs in the US won't even entertain international student applicants. For example, when I talked to my MD program on campus and I asked them if they would even consider, they said absolutely not. They would consider Canadian citizens, but they don't have spaces for international students. My DO program on the other hand said, you know, if we had a spacer between the two, and it tells a very clear story about what spaces are actually available in these programs for students. So if you're looking at the total number of matriculated students in the United States medical system coming in as first-year students, only about 1.2% of those will actually be non-US citizens, and that includes the Canadian citizens. So I think you could say at least half of those are probably Canadian. It's not high numbers. There are a lot of reasons for that. A lot of it is there's a lot of public funding for medical school, and so priority goes to students maybe from that state, if it's a state school, or from the region and from the US, and less spots are open for international students. And we are trying to train to keep people like me healthy and bring great talent in. But there are obviously other paths available. And the Caribbean is one of those, obviously. They're sending their students to us for residency, which we're quite grateful for. And if a student is dead set on being a doctor, specialty programs will absolutely take them. In fact, you can find those numbers online, but I can tell you that for some specialty programs, the number of applicants from US citizens and the number of applications from non-US citizens is the same. And a lot of those students will come into that pediatric medicine specialty program later once they're certified in another country. In terms of other options, I like to talk about similar things. Think about the research opportunities, especially if you think about quality of life. Do you know how much doctors work? They're like on call all the time. And they don't really get that opportunity to build the relationships. They got to switch to that next room pretty quickly. So thinking about things like, yes, bioengineering, that has huge impacts. Medical research is also a great opportunity. And if you're talking to students who are thinking they would like to maybe migrate to the US eventually, the opportunities for H-1B visas, working with nonprofit research corporations, are very different than they are with for-profit companies. For-profit companies are restricted on the number of H-1Bs they can provide based on that national pool, but nonprofit entities have a different path and different numbers of visas available. And so that could mean more opportunities for those students with, quite frankly, less years of total education. I also like to talk about things like nutritional sciences and pharmaceutical studies. I don't want to get too into it because I think Matt did an excellent job of talking about some of those opportunities. Those exist in the US as well. And we heavily encourage students to explore those because I find the vast majority of students that I talk to personally who are saying, I want to be a doctor, actually just want to make a difference in people's lives. And there are a lot of ways that you can make a difference. And we heavily encourage students to explore those options, whatever those might be, and think about the things that you could do, in the US, but also you could take anywhere, really, as another alternative. We're running low on time, aren't we? And so we assume you guys probably have questions for us. We're slightly nervous, but willing to take them.
Is there any scope for a student looking for a scholarship in a medical school? Do you have some experience?
They should be looking at regions where they can afford full fees. And that always breaks my heart and it breaks their heart, but I want them to know that now before they even start kind of going too far down the path. I tell them, find a budget. And this is what I tell all of my students, but especially for medicine. Talk to your parents about budget and then work within that budget because you don't want to be in debt for the rest of your life. That's a terrible way to live.
On the St. George's side or the Caribbean Medicine School, I can say that most of them would offer a good amount of scholarship and can range anything between $50,000 to $100,000. One thing to understand that they are primarily into medicine education, right? Their bread and butter runs on medicine education, so they have a lot of options available for deserving candidates, for sure.
I can speak for the US. The odds, not in your favor. Has it happened? Is there a unicorn out there? Yeah, there are a couple shining star exceptions to the rule students. I was talking to a colleague earlier who knows someone who went through the UWC World High School system and then came to the US, and yes, she did get a scholarship. She she's not normal. And I would never advise students that that's realistically what's going to happen for you. There's not funding available for US students who want to be doctors in most cases. There's absolutely not funding available for international students interested in the same path typically.
It's the same in the UK.
And for Canada. And for the 9 students, I don't think I'm going to even talk about what scholarships are available.
It costs about £250,000 a year for the states per doctor that they train. So realistically, the fee that we're charging is essentially the cost of training that international student who's highly unlikely to remain in the National Health Service. So that's the balance that we're doing. We're a non-profit organisation, which you might not think when it's £44,000 a year per year tuition for a medical student. That's the cost of training a doctor. Is that?
I have 2 questions. One is a clarification for UK. When you say international, you mean non-UK citizens, right? It's not, or is it the way
No.
you guys applied for your other?
So when I say international, at the moment, I mean non-EU citizens, which is
right.
quite an important distinction.
Right. Based on citizenship, not residency. I mean, as in.
No,
Okay.
no, that's based on residency. Okay, so we don't count. Basically, in the UK, it doesn't matter what passport you hold. It only matters what your residence is.
Okay.
So those 24
Got it.
places are for students who are non-resident in the UK or EU.
Even if they have a UK
Doesn't
passport.
matter.
Okay, all right, thank
Yeah.
you. And the other question was the US, doing an MBBS in India and then taking the US MLE for US, then do they join as, do they go into the residency, or do you know how that typically works?
Yeah, I can kind of answer that question. So MBBS in India, and once they finish step 1, USMLE step 1, step 2, and step 3, they can apply for residencies in US. The acceptance rates we are looking for is very low. The stats we have at the moment, we're talking about AIMS specifically, acceptance is around 25%. It's primarily not because of their step 1 scores, but also from the recommendation letters they have to obtain from the clinical side from the US. So they have to get recommendation letters to apply for residencies. That's very, very important.
Hi, I'm just going to continue the point that she asked, because I actually do work a lot with British students who are in schools in India, and if they want to apply to medicine, I thought that they would, if they had a British passport, they would still be considered as part of the local pool.
I don't think so. It will depend. So the way that we do an assessment of somebody's visa status, and I'm technically not allowed to give visa advice because, so please do not, act on this. The way that we do a visa, an international fees assessment, it isn't to do with their passport. Like I say, it's to do with their residency. Now, if they can show that they are permanently resident in the UK, so let's say you've got the child of a British army officer who's, I know, for some reason is stationed abroad, that British army officer is going to have a 2-year rotation abroad, but it's a defined amount of time. Yeah. So if you've got a British passport holder at your school and their parents have moved to India on a fixed term contract because they're working for, I don't know, Mercedes-Benz or something like that, then out in India, they might not be considered to be permanently resident in India because they haven't packed up their whole life in the UK. They're going to go back. Yeah. So there's quite a lot of complexity around how we actually look and define what an international fee payer
No, I'm not
is.
talking about the fees. I'm talking more about the, are they considered as a part of the international pool or part of the British pool?
I
in
think
terms
they are
of
considered part of the international pool, irregardless of their
they
passport.
should all just go to boarding school in the UK 2 years before then.
Their residency
It's still
doesn't count if you've come to the UK for purposes of education only.
okay.
So there's not an easy. This is the thing that people don't realise in the UK when they pack up their whole lives. And the moment you step off UK soil, you've taken away your kid's right to go to university in the UK for free. Yeah, it doesn't matter what your passport is. You've suddenly given up your residency in the UK, and that's that. Thank you very much. And it's sometimes a bit heartbreaking when you say that to parents.
Okay,
But as far as I know, that's the case.
on to the other side of the room. And then this is probably the last question. Yeah, we got 4 minutes. 4 minutes. We'll see how long it goes.
Really briefly, it's not really a question. I'm from the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. I was really interested to hear this talk about medical schools. So I think it's really important as a guidance counsellor that your advice to students who are really passionate about medicine and wanting to become a doctor is that they're aware of all of the options around the world. And there are other options. Ireland will be another one as well. Cost is always going to be an issue, though, if you want to study medicine, because it's going to be probably the most expensive course in any university. But there are really reputable, international recognised universities around the world that do offer international seats. So we have 70% of our seats in our medical school are for non-EU students as well. So just to bear that in mind. And yes, I do agree, that whole EU versus non-EU conundrum is a really complicated issue. And we come up against it all the time in Ireland as well. If you have an Irish or an EU passport, you know, if you've done at least 5 years of schooling in the EU, you would be considered an EU applicant. If you have a UK passport, that would probably change now once Brexit happens, so you may not still be able to apply to the rest of Europe as an EU applicant. But it is something that really you need to take offline to discuss with individual universities, I think. Okay?
And I do think that's an excellent point. We know our systems to a degree, but the world is a big place.
So with the NCI, bringing NEET as a mandatory entrance exam for students applying to foreign institutions, if all of you could throw some light on that.
Yes, I would love to actually, NET. And so NET, if you see from the past what has changed in the Indian medicine system itself. Earlier it used to be called AIPMTs and then moved to NET. 2 years back they said it is mandatory for everybody to take NET if they want to study medicine outside India. But the reference was given in a way that if you want to come back to India and practice medicine. This is primarily for institutions who are offering MBBS curriculum but not allowing the students to practice in their home country. For an example, that if I go to China and study medicine, I cannot do my post-graduation there because I would not have the right Chinese or Mandarin capabilities, proficiencies. I have to come back to India, but the quality of education obtained there does not really match sometime in India. So what Indian government said, everybody should qualify NEET. But the qualifying NEET is not the entry requirement for St. George's and many of the other universities here to get onto the program. What it means to the students is that if you primarily wanted to come back to India, straight after your medicine degree, then you cannot practice if you do not have NEET scores. But there is another gadget which has a gray mark between the two, which says that if you become a board certified doctors in 5 countries, which is US, UK, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, you are automatically accepted back in India as a full-fledged doctor, as a specialist doctor. So it is very, very important for students to understand which countries they are choosing to study medicine, from where they're getting their board certification, and when they are coming back to India. Second aspect of qualification of NEET itself is a bigger task because each year it says 50% of the percentile marks, and it varies. So qualifying in NEET is not a bigger deal. Question really arises whether should I take NEET or not? Just take it. Qualifying is very simple. Scoring 80 marks, qualifying marks. It is like clearing anyways, and if you're wanting to be a doctor, getting 80 marks in NEET should not be a problem at all. Take it, keep yourself okay in terms of Indian medicine system. You never know, system changes. We are still going through a big shift. Medical council are getting closed to national medical councils getting open. So a lot of things are getting changed in Indian medicine system. Take the test, be secure yourself, and so that you are able to come back to India as well. It's a long journey, to be honest. That's correct. We ourselves do that as well. True, and that is particularly the case with IB, where physics is not allowed sometimes if you wanted to get into medicine. and that really restricts you to take an ET as well. You cannot take an ET if you do not. If it does, that is fine, yeah. It does, then it's fine. As an open, irregular diploma, then it's fine. But physics is a mandatory requirement. Biology, chemistry, and physics are mandatory requirement to have it to take an ET. Only biology, chemistry will not.
I just wanted to add really quickly, so Woodstock is transitioning to being an IB school, but we don't feel that doing an irregular diploma kind of fits in with our educational philosophy generally, and so we've actually created an Indian medical pathway for students, which doesn't involve completing the full IB diploma, but students still graduate with a U.S. high school diploma, and we put a lot of thought into this over the last year, so if you want to chat about how we kind of envision doing that for our future classes, I'd be happy to reach out.
I think that we can.
Yeah. It's 2:02. So thank you guys so much for this, and thank you guys for coming.